All right, today I'm talking about outlets and electrical in a pole barn, interior of a pole barn, finished interior of a pole barn. I have seen this done several different ways. This is what I've kind of settled on as my favorite way to do it. I have seen people that when they put a finished inner liner in their pole barn, they don't do any electric at all. They wait till all the insulation and finished liner panel is in, and then they come in with surface-mounted raceway, conduit, things like that. That's okay. It's an okay way to do it, but when I put the walls on, I kind of want to be almost done, and I'd really like for that stuff to be hidden. So the other way I've seen people do it is they'll put plastic boxes in the wall or metal boxes in the wall. Well, once you do that, you've established where that outlet's going to be. What happens then when you're putting liner panel in and that outlet is right over a major rib, or it's right next to a major rib or something like that? You're having to cut precise holes in the steel while you've got 2-3 guys ready to throw sheets. It doesn't make for a quick installation of the sheets. You know, and then you got to put the face plates on, and what if they're over the rib? It's just, it's too hard to lay out where that stuff is. So the way that I like doing it, and that we've kind of established, is that, you know, there's a purlin here. Obviously, you can see where we've screwed the metal in. We know there's a purlin there. We know there's wood there. That's a great place for us to screw our box to. What we don't know is exactly where the ribs are going to come out. We can kind of take a guess by where the ribs are on the outside of the building, because a lot of times the outside rib and the inside rib on a pole barn line up, or they should be very close. So we can kind of go in and say, well, there's ribs here and here on the outside, and we want to shoot for the middle. So that's what we do, and we get our non-metallic cable put in there. But when we put our staples on it, we put them a little further back, and we don't do them real tight. That way we can kind of move this back and forth to hit our ribs. So when we're in rough end stage, we've got the insulation in there. These are just kind of sticking out like this. But then when we go to put the sheets on, we measure over from our last sheet and we say, okay, we're in the third bay, and you can move this wire to kind of hit on one of these minor ribs. And the way we've figured out is that you drill it kind of in this inner crotch of either the left or the right minor rib, right above where the wood is. You can see I've got my finger in here. That is right where our wood is. That's where we want it to be. And then as we're putting the panel up, if we've got to move the wire 4.5 inches either way, there's a 9-inch module here, we can move that wire 4.5 inches either way. It's not stapled tight right there where it's going to force us to be in that one place. So then what we end up with is these wires coming out right above our purlin, and that's where that's where we're able to fasten our box. So this is a 12-2, 120 volt. This is what our outlets are going to be on, our regular kind of utility outlets. This is a 10-2. This is for our 30 amp twist lock for 220. So let's forget about that one for right now, and we're going to make this one up. So what kind of box we put on this? We are going to use what electricians would call a 4 square. So this is a 4-inch by 4-inch. This is kind of a regular depth. It's 1.5 inches. They also make them in a 2 1/4, a deep box. Don't want to use the deep box here unless we have to, because we just don't have that much to make up in here. We can certainly make up 2 outlets with 12-2 in one of these. This one's got what's called combo knockout, so it's got a 3/4 and a 1/2 inch knockout. Now that's not really that important for this because we're going to use a 1/2 inch bushing. But on this, we might want to use a 3/4 inch bushing to get the larger wire through, or if you have more wires. So because this is on the right minor rib, we're going to do it such that the wire comes in on one of the right knockouts. And the other thing I want to try, I don't have to do this, I want to try to make so the box is facing this way, because then when I put my screws in, they're nice and far and wide. It gives a much more secure feeling box. We can put it in that way if we have to, but you know, then the screws are closer together. So let's play the little game here. We're gonna do it like that, and we're gonna knock out this knockout right here. The way I knock those out is I use my pliers. Kind of like a linesman plier, not really. I use the end, give that a little pop, break it out right in the trash, and then we're going to use an NM bushing. Get that in there, give it a little pop, get her started. That guy's not wanting to go in there. I think that's because I was through a concentric knockout at there. It wasn't really liking me popping that in there with my pliers. That one's being a little bit of a pain. All right. We got a way to fix that. We will... Either way, we're concentric knockout there. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, there we go. Got our little knockout in there. So next thing that is important to do, I know this circuit is not live. I haven't turned on any of them yet, but gonna go ahead and check it with our chicken stick non-contact voltage tester. So don't get any red there. Don't get any red there. Well, what if we're getting a false negative? How do you test this? We can go over to an outlet that we know is live and check it to make sure we get the red. The other thing you can do is you rub it on your shirt. You see how it goes red there? It's a way you can test that. It generates, I guess, enough of a voltage differential that it detects that. So, okay, so we know that's dead. So then we're gonna use our T-strippers, and I'll leave a good bit of wire there. These T-strippers are specifically for NM, and they have this spot here where you can bruise the outside of the cable and pull the outer sheath off. So do that. Pull off the outer sheath. Pull off your paper. Okay, and so now we are going to slide that guy through there. And here's the tough part. You want to pull the cable through, but you don't want to pull it all through, because then you got a bunch of outer sheath hanging through, which you don't want. Okay, so now I've got in there, and got our level. Got that kind of started on there. And I'm going to use just a regular pole barn, self-piercing pointy. So we get that started, and we'll check our level. Okay, and see, now I'm able to use those two screw holes that are wide set. Now, normally, as long as your outlet is fairly level, you're good to go. But on this one, I'm going to have another one right next to it. So when I go to set this box, the most important thing is going to be that they're in line. Now, if two outlets are 4 or 5 feet apart and they're not the perfect level, you're never going to notice it. But when they're 9 inches apart, they better be both at the same level. In that case, you would take your second box, and when you set that, bring this level over here, use that to establish your height first before you start that first screw. And you can move this over and get it level. Okay, so what do we got here now? We've got our in and our out, because these outlets are daisy chained. I've got 3 sets of these outlets on one circuit. So 120 amp circuit is going to serve 3 boxes like this, which have a total of 6 outlets. So there we go, we got that. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm using these pre-made pigtails. And so what this is just a piece of 12 gauge with a green grounding screw. And then back of this box, it already has a pre-tapped hole for that. So what this will let us do is establish our ground to the box. So I get that in there, and I'm gonna aim for that corner right there. And I'm gonna pull out my grounds. And actually, I'm gonna aim for this corner right over here. And pull out my grounds, tuck those into the corner as well. Okay, so now we've got kind of all those in the corner. I want one of these to be my ground, and I want the other two to be short. So we got those kind of all together. Cut those off. Give that one a little strip. Okay, so what have I got now? I have got the box bond, I've got my two grounds coming in and out, and I've got one that I've left long. That is gonna go to both the outlets. So I'm gonna use a greenie. It's a wire nut with a hole in it. And what that lets you do is slide the wire nut over your only one wire. Kind of pull those out of the box, make sure they're the same length. Now, there's two kinds of electricians. Those that pre-twist wires and those that don't pre-twist wires. I do not pre-twist wires. I think it is a waste of your time, and as long as you can get those wires held in there at the same length and you get a good wrap here, there is no need for regular makeups, you know, a few, 3, 4 wires to pre-twist. So we got that, give them the tug, they feel good, and we're gonna tuck that kind of back in there like that, okay? So now we need to talk about outlets. For this, I am using these Legrand outlets. I love this outlet, and I'll tell you why. It's a 20 amp outlet, it's spec grade, and it's not expensive. If you go to Menards and you buy more than like 12 or something like that of these, they go from $2.98 a piece to $1.98 a piece. So for $2, you get a spec grade outlet. Very nicely built. It has a full length steel backstrap, riveted construction. You can see even the center screw back there is connected to that backstrap. It is back wire, so what that means is there is a little U-slot there, and the screw actually pulls a plate up against it. So this means you can use it with stranded wire or solid wire. You do not have to bend a U-hook to go under the screw. So if you're going to be using stranded wire, which in commercial a lot of times you do, these are a great outlet to use with that. Plus they're the 20 amp, and they really stand up to a lot of abuse. Because we are going to be using these in a surface mount configuration, where you have a surface mount cover, you take off the Mickey Mouse ears and the screw. So pull the screws out, and you got to do this for every outlet. And then you see the Mickey Mouse ears are scored. So I put my pliers right on the score, you give it a couple, and it breaks right off, right in the trash can. So this becomes second nature when you make up a bunch of these, and I have made up a bunch of these. In fact, you can sit around and do this to all of them before you even start. But so you pull all that stuff out of there, pull out the Mickey Mouse ears, and there we're ready to go. There's a naked outlet that will go right into the back of your cover. Now you can see if you had the Mickey Mouse ears on there, that would not work. So, so there we go. So we're gonna make the outlets up now. Here's a note on this. There's a couple ways to do this. So one of these is gonna be our hot feed in, and one of them is gonna be the feed out to the next outlet. Some people think that it is best practice to cut these off and take 2 wires and wire nut it all together and feed the outlets off of 2 jumpers that go to a wire nut. The thought being that they think it's a better path for the outlets that are beyond. I don't buy into that theory. To me, being able to go into one outlet, out of the other to the next outlet, out of that outlet to the next row of outlets is perfectly acceptable. Now, that's up to you to make that decision. Sometimes the local inspector will make that decision for you. So, but for me and my shop, we're gonna go through the outlet to the next one. So, you know, we want a good little bit of wire in here. You know, maybe the length of your T-strip or something like that. Don't short yourself up there. And I'm gonna save one set of this, and I'll show you why. We've got to make a jumper to go between those two outlets. And here's how I make up the jumper. There's 10 different ways to do this. This is how I do it. I take my neutral and my hot, and I cut these to be about the same length as your outlet setup. That one was about perfect to begin with, okay? Just need one of those per set of 2 outlets. So then I strip these. Make sure you don't strip these too long because this is a back wire outlet. You do not need to bend a J-hook. So you don't need as long of a piece of wire, okay? So there we've got some jumpers that are stripped. And what I'm gonna do is, top outlet, I'm gonna wire this in. Each one of these screws has 2 places for wire. So you theoretically could put up to 4 pieces of wire in each one. I don't know why you would, but old habits die hard. I still put it in the one where the screw tends to pull it in, even though you really don't have any contact with the screw head. All you have is contact with the plate that pulls up behind it. Give those a good set, but don't murder them because these screws tend to strip out. So now you've got top outlet and you've got your things coming out. Okay, now you take your top outlet and you turn that sucker upside down. Okay, that puts your hot on the right side and it puts your neutral on the right side. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing here. We are going to run those down, give them a good set. And always be careful when you are wiring outlets with a screwdriver because this is one of those rare times when you're kind of directing energy towards yourself. And anytime you direct energy towards yourself, you get the risk that if you slip, you're going to give yourself a nasty cut. So just be careful when you're directing energy towards yourself. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to now, while it's easy, cheap and free, I'm going to loosen up our other terminals because it seems like sometimes, depends on the manufacturer, they'll leave one set undone for you and the other set they've run up. So we're going to loosen those up a bit. Okay, now why the heck did I wire these things together in this crazy configuration here? So I've got the top of one to the top of the other, right? Give her a little twist. Okay, now you have your jumper on the back. So I'm going to leave them a little splayed out like that because I still got to get to this screw here. And I got access to that screw. You know, and this screw here I got to get access to. I got access to that screw now. Okay, so there we go. That's got to go on there. So let's make these guys up here. So about the length of our T-stripper, and we're going to give those a little strip. Not too long, not too short. Okay, so electrically, it doesn't really matter, but I think it is good practice to make sure that this black and white are a pair, this black and white are a pair. I can see that that's where they're coming in, and that, you know, one pair is on this side, one pair is on that side. Electrically, totally the same, but best practices for me. So I'm going to start with the neutral on this side. Get that guy on there. Now, at this point, it's all about packaging, right? Anybody can get this in there. But you got to be able to get the wires back in there, not tear them up, and get the cover on. So there you can see where having those splayed out like that is helpful because I can get this screwdriver in there and get that in there. Okay. All right, so now I've got my wire on that outlet all done. Now we're going to switch back to this neutral. Here's where it gets a little tricky because you got to start getting everything put on top of itself. And I've already loosened these screws up, so boom, those wires go right in there. And our last hot wire. So that one I stripped a little bit too long, so I'm just going to take a tiny bit off of that. I want that to go all the way in there, but I don't want to leave too much copper exposed there. Give that a set. Okay, so here we go. We got that. We can kind of bend those kind of back to where they're supposed to be. So now all we've got to do is get our neutral wire on there. So those go right under here. So I'm gonna kind of pull that out a little bit, but see, I've got that established. That's where it's gonna go back when I get it back in there. And I know that my outlet, you know, is maybe gonna be about there. So let's just say, okay, that's where she's gonna go. So first thing we're gonna do here is put a U-bend in this guy, okay? A little bit of an open U-bend. We're gonna loop it around this. Now, you really can't get this to move back there yet until you establish where your wires are gonna bend. And this is something that people have a lot of trouble with. How do I get 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound sack? This is up to you to establish what I call a Z-bend. So my wire comes in here. Well, there's a bunch of room over here. So I want my wires to start tucking back in there. So I'm gonna guess that if I bend this here, by the time the wires get over there, it's gonna be about here, okay? So I'm gonna establish the Z-bend. Boom, all right? So I push that back in there. Well, now these wires need to be kind of more up in here. So I'm gonna grab my outlets and kind of put a bend in them, get them started out of the back of the outlets. And I'm kind of gonna over push them, get them in there, all right? So now we've Z-bent that back in there. Now they can kind of come in and out a little bit, right? But we've pre-established where they're gonna go. So now I'm gonna kind of just roll that up a little bit and get my ground wire across that set. And I always use my T-stripper to kind of pinch that a little bit to get it established where it's gonna go. And get that tight. Now this one's gotta come over and get on that one. My wire's a little longer maybe than it needs to be. I'm gonna cut that off and make kind of a traditional J-bend or U-bend. The way I make a J-bend is I grab it right at the end from the side and I get it to about there, okay? And I'm not just trying to bend a J in it. I wanna bend a Michael Keaton era Joker question mark into it, okay? So I bend it to about there and then I kind of open it up and I put a little bend in it with my thumb and then I kind of finish it a little bit. So there's my Joker question mark there, okay? So, takes a little bit of negotiating here to get these in there, especially with 12 gauge, it's fairly tight. Okay, so I get that on there and then I use my little pliers on there to really get that bent in there. Okay. All right, so now we got that. And you can see how I established where that the ground is gonna go back in there. I've got my Z-bend on the back of my outlets. Now, the one thing that you really wanna make sure you have figured out is that since the ground wire is not insulated, you've gotta make sure that when you shovel this back in there, that ground wire is not gonna sneakily flip around and get on your hot terminal, okay? Because when you turn that on, that's instant fireworks. Very possible you'll damage the brake and you have to throw it away. So that's why it is so important to have that good ground secured to the box and everywhere. Because let's say you didn't have that ground secured to the box and for some reason these weren't also grounded and attached to the box. Let's play along here. And let's say you're using a plastic box. And this ground wire were to come around and touch your hot wire. Well, now this could be at 120 volt potential while your steel could be at 120 volt potential. Now, mind you, we've got several ground paths here. Every single box in this building is bonded to this by virtue of being attached to the box. And most likely it would just pop your breaker. But that's your secondary path for your current back to ground. So we want to make sure that that's not touching that box. So, or touching the hot leads. So you pull out your screws from your box. I usually set those up there. I usually leave them in place until I'm ready to put the cover on, and then I set them up there. Now we're ready to put the cover on. So that's the cover. Got 3 sets of holes there. Some people, and they give you screws. They give you these little screws and these washer cap nuts. They give you 4 of them with which each outlet set up like this. Some electricians will just run the screw in there and say, I'm done. And it works, it holds the outlet in, but you're not just trying to hold the outlet in, you are trying to resist the force of the plug pushing it in. So if you only put this screw in the center here, and you've got a plug, or a plug that's fighting it in there a little bit, you could bend the outlet, or you could break this the thread and push the outlet back. So really what we're wanting to do is use these two here with the screw and the nut to really firmly pull those steel back straps to the cover. So unfortunately, it is a little tricky. You've got to get the outlets kind of where they got to be, and then you got to get one started. Now, kind of a cheat way to do this is to drive this screw in there temporarily and use that to just hold the outlet in there while you get these screws and nuts started. But I prefer to go the route where I drop it on the floor several times and pick the nut and screw up and then finally get it. So you got to kind of get the screw through there and put the nut on the back of your finger and get it started. It's a little tricky. So I usually will get that fairly tight on the top, but I don't want to get it super tight, because what'll happen sometimes is you get the outlet so tight in there and then you go to get the second screw in and you can't get it in. So these Spec Grades outlets also have a little, they've got like a little spring bail that goes through this top hole. There's kind of a little set of wires there, and I believe that is for making sure that the ground is maintained. Maybe I could be wrong. It may be for screw retention, but it makes it a little difficult sometimes to get the screw popped through there. But then once you do, the screw stays in place. So almost here. So I got that one a little bit loose, so I can still move the bottom of that outlet. Grab my last set of screws and get that started. Okay, so now that we've got this cover on there with the outlets, we've got kind of our last chance to take a peek at all of our connections and make sure that as we Z-bend this towards the wall here, we are not going to get ourselves in trouble, right? Another thing to watch out for is to make sure that as you push this back in there, the insulation on your wires isn't going to get smashed in such a way where, let's say, you're going to take a hot wire and smash it up against your ground screw. You know, the wire on the insulation on this wire is not, it's not made for a lot of heavy physical protection. Sometimes I see people take their screw driver tip and they'll push it on the wire to get the wire to go back where they want. I'm not a fan of that, because that's sharp and you're very likely to nick the insulation, and maybe won't show up now, but 10 years from now, a little bit of moisture in the air, you could have a problem. So now we take our last look in here and kind of pre-bend anything that we think we need to bend. And I get that bent kind of right up where I want it. And see how nice that is? That's really super close to where we got to be. And then I will take my screw. I usually do the bottom screw, don't know why. Get that one started, and then I'll get my other one started, and then we will run her home. So there's several more outlets on this circuit, so I haven't turned this circuit on yet. And but I've forgotten which circuit number this is. But after I get all the rest of the outlets that are on this circuit and I'm ready to turn this on, I will make a note of what breaker number this circuit is, and I'll write that right there in permanent marker. So I'll write, number sign 41 or something like that. And I'll do that on every single outlet that we've got. That way, in the future, you know exactly what breaker you've got to go turn off. It's just, this is a kind of a commercial building. You probably wouldn't do that on a house. You wouldn't write the circuit number right on the faceplate, but this is a commercial application. This is my shop. So do it now while you remember it, and then in the future, if you ever have to turn it off, you'll have a good reference of what to do there. So that's how I do pole barn outlets, and I think it's a really nice nice way to do it. Next I'll be putting the 220 outlet on, and hope you enjoyed the video.